They showed up as 6,000 this week, and I believe last week it was like 200 or 300. So something's going on with them.
Well, the numbers are very important when you take into account what they represent. They represent the amount of new homes for sale in the greater Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough area. And once we take those into account, considering the housing crash of 2008, the recession of the 2020, and now the recession we're currently in, numbers are looking pretty awesome. I have to say these numbers are awesome at 6,572 listings. You know, this reminds me of that time I got that universal remote for my house. Mm-hmm. It changed everything.
Boy, you guys, I've been out for a little over 3 weeks.
Well, last week was our first show in like a month, it felt like, our first live show. So
I felt like it was more like it's the start of the new season. Occasionally a television show has seasonal breaks. We take time off. We run some reruns.
So what season are we in now?
Please tell me you guys have not been reporting these crazy numbers.
No, I reported the 6,572.
That is not right. Okay. So when I got in here this morning, I've been out for like a month, and it feels like so long. So I get in here, and I look at this, and it says the number of new listings is 6,572. I'm like, wait a minute.
So like,
this is not the numbers we are tracking here.
Every available house is for sale right now.
So what happened is, and our MLS is pretty broad, right? You know this, Jenny. She's our guest for the hour, and I think your mic is down. Let me get you potted up here. There you go. I got you.
Okay.
Now.
Can you hear me now?
So basically what we do is we've been tracking these numbers since COVID started because we wanted to see how it was going to impact our local market. So we had to pull some of the same data so we have something to compare it from, right? So Florida Realtors does a fantastic job putting out a lot of metrics and data, but we wanted something more real time because that comes out so late, right? By the time they drop it, it's 45 days old usually. So we wanted a way to be able to track and monitor that more real time. So what I did was in the MLS, we went in and set up our search, and we said, okay, we're going to check 3 counties. So Pasco, because, Hernando's on their own little planet over there in their own MLS.
Yes. Hey, we're growing. We're expanding up in that direction. You have to take that into account. We're constantly expanding up towards Hernando County.
We are, and we sell in that area, right? It's not that we don't sell in that area. It's that the point is we were trying to track the same data set of numbers, right, in a more real-time manner than 45 days out. So we pulled single-family homes in Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough County, and then we wanted to pull a 7-day trend so that we knew, okay, in the last 7 days, how many new active single-family homes were on the market in the 3 counties that we are looking at. And so when I got in here this morning and I saw a number that was like 6,572, I'm like, my goodness, the market did not change that much.
Is that the whole state? What is that number?
It's basically whatever the MLS populated, any type of property.
Oh, any type of property.
Yeah, probably not land and like some other stuff, but like any type of home, like condos, townhomes, villas, like manufactured mobile homes.
Yeah. Well, so if we're showing 828 for new single-family homes in the 3-county region.
So stop looking at this because this is not accurate.
But there's something like 5,000 other listings that aren't listed?
Stop looking at this because what you're pulling is a very wide variety that God knows where that's coming from in the state of Florida. So, no, can't look at that.
And
God would know where it's coming from, especially on a Good Friday.
Listen, we can pull the data from Florida.
Good Friday to you too, sir.
Good Friday to you, Katrina. Good Friday to you.
We can pull the data through Florida Realtors, but it's delayed, right? So the point is more real-time data.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're looking at 828 new listings, which is still an upswing from where we were a couple of months ago.
Pretty good, right?
Market's looking pretty strong going into the spring break season, this Easter season. Price decreases are still right around 1,100. Solds are at 807 and pendings at 974. So pendings are outpacing new listings.
So do we think it's still more balanced, or are we leaning one way or the other on this?
We're still in the seller's market. We've been ticking up a little slowly towards that balanced market, but we're still very much in the seller's market.
When we look at the new listings compared to sold, I mean, if we have 828 new listings popping up, but 807 of them are instantly gone, because from the sold standpoint,
we're going to stay pretty balanced from where we are.
Yeah, that looks really balanced. Now, what I've been doing is I like to compare, and I can't do that because we lack the data, but I usually like to compare last week's new listings to this week's pending to see how much of that inventory is actually shrinking. But I mean, there's like a 19-unit difference between what's replacing what's disappearing. Mm-hmm. And that's not even counting when we take the withdrawals, or the temporary off markets, that's another 200. So it looks like we have more units leaving than entering.
You have to pretty much disregard temporary off market because, in my opinion, something's going on there. So with the clear cooperation rules, Jenny, you're familiar with this because you do a lot of stuff with the Board of Realtors. I personally don't like it. I've been very vocal about that because I feel like it's NAR overstepping the relationship with the seller. That's how I feel about it. I get why they did it. Totally understand that. But this is an example of why we would use temporary off the market. Let's say I sign a listing and that we talked about that prep period, right? That launch period. Well, we're going to pick a target date where we expect to go live, but sellers don't always hit that. Sometimes most of the time, it takes them more time than they think it's going to take to actually hit the market. Sometimes they're sooner. Most of the time, it's going to be longer. And so per NAR guidelines, we would have to activate that listing, Leo, and then immediately suspend it to temporary off market. So I want you to think about temporary off market as like a suspension status.
But, okay, so let me ask you this. Would new listings, would it be counted as a new listing if it goes immediately temporary off market?
Yeah, if it hit that active, and it depends on when we pull it. I got to go in and look at actually.
Because I'm saying if it appears as a new listing and then it goes to temporary off market, then it would be relevant because that 828 would go down.
It depends on the status, the exact status when we pull it.
You have actual days on market and then consecutive days on market. And so temporarily off the market will add to your consecutive days on market and not your actual days on market, which is why sometimes you'll see two different numbers there.
But that's different. Like, we're not even talking about the same thing. Because what I'm talking about is, let's say, okay, we take a listing today, or let's say I took a listing in January, right? And what's today's date? The
Almost
20.
April. If you haven't sold it by now. Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, if you took it in January.
Okay, so let's say on my listing agreement, the seller said, I want my listing to go live on the 29th of March. That's going to give me enough time, but we signed that agreement in January, and the 29th has rolled around and they're not quite ready. Well, per our listing agreement and MLS rules and NAR rules, I have to activate that listing and then put it into a suspense status, which is temporary off market.
But I guess
now, none of the days, like what you're talking about, the actual days on market and cumulative days on the market, none of those days roll because it's not active on the market. It's in like a suspense status.
I guess what I was just trying to say, though, is if we have 828 new listings, 807 sold, and 830 withdrawn, that's those two. The number of properties disappearing is outpacing the number of properties appearing.
I know what you're saying, but the reality of it is I'd have to go in and pull that field for a 7-day trend to be able to accurately depict what you're talking about.
But then we're back in the 6,000
No.
range.
We're not going to be in the 6,000.
So do you think the majority of the temporarily off market is what you're talking about, or do you think it's maybe we put it on market, didn't really know kind of the condition of the house, we get a 4-point, and it's like, oh, it's not just the roof,
So
it's
that's
the electrical,
part of
it's
it.
the plumbing, it's
Yeah.
the house basically just needs to be
So
fixed.
that's why instead of temporary off market, like that's realtor language, think about suspense status because that makes sense. Why else would you suspend a listing and not have it on the market and ready to show it? Well, because of that funky NAR rule, because there's something on the 4-point, maybe the buyer backed out and the seller says, oh, I probably need to get these things fixed, right, before I relist it and let another buyer see it. I don't want to do the same thing again. So they'll put it in that temporary off market, get some repairs done, and then reactivate the listing.
So, a question for that. This goes to Leo as well. I was talking to one of our inspectors yesterday, and he was saying he had a house, and it was the seller was the realtor. Okay, and she must have had her inspector come.
Oh my!
Because the 4-point said 7 years, and for the roof, and he went on the roof, and I don't know if you guys see this often. Went on the roof. There's literally shingles in the yard that have blown off the roof. It's a 19-year-old 3-tab shingle. It's been repaired in some areas, missing stuff. I don't know what happened with that inspector to say it had 7 years, but I mean, I don't know why somebody would even do that.
Yeah.
Like,
I wouldn't do it.
Out, right?
If I was the inspector, there's no way. And how could they even ask their inspector to do that? No, they're selling
I
that.
don't know.
I mean, maybe the inspector didn't get on the roof. You'd have to take a look at the photos, but it's very dangerous to be a seller's home inspector because someone is immediately going to quality check your work. So if you think you're going to try and pull one over and you're going to get an out-of-state buyer that's not going to want to hire a home inspector, that's a risk a home inspector should not be willing to take.
Does that go on your E&O, right?
Yeah, it would go against your E&O. It might actually appear on your license at that point because that's gross negligence to say the roof's in great shape and it's only a 7-year-old roof. It's a 19.
Missing shingles.
It is missing shingles all over the yard.
So that's one example. It could be some repairs are done. It could be that we're not yet hit that target date. It could be sometimes the seller has said, I had enough showing the property and I want to move out. Let's resume showings after I move out. That can happen. It could be that they're going on vacation and they don't want anybody in their house while they're gone. It could be that it's Good Friday. Maybe it's a holy holiday for them and they don't want to have any showings between now and Easter. So they might suspend the listing for 3 days.
Well, you wouldn't have to suspend the listing for that. You just say, hey, I'm not going to do any showings this weekend.
People do, though. They suspend it because you could block it out. I wouldn't for 3 days. I would just block off showings and say schedule next week. But there's some people that do. Usually it's an extended period of time.
Gotcha. Like if it's already been on the market for a while, maybe.
No, like if they say, okay, I had a property that was a couple $1 million I showed in Hudson, and the seller had it overpriced. We gave him an offer, had a lot of really good data to support it. He didn't like the offer that we gave them, so he put it in a temporary off-market status. We don't know till how long. They're just like, we want to suspend it for now. Sometimes it's a tactic to give it some more time till the listing agreement expires. I don't know. Like there's a lot of reasons why some agents don't always communicate very well during the transaction.
What? Really? No.
The number one complaint, the number one thing people tell me they want is communication. Good communication, lots of it. How is their listing performing? What else is we do in-depth reviews every week so that we can tell people how their listing is performing and give them an idea of what agent said when they saw the property, because it's hard to get that right away. Sometimes they're still with their client. It's not a good time to give it. Then there's a precise moment in time when you have to get it if you're going to get it. And so literally it can be a full-time job for a listing agent, but it's important data and information that you need as a listing agent and a home seller to make sure that you're going to be able to move that property accordingly. Make sense?
Sure.
You don't like my long answer. That's fine.
It's a pretty long answer. Even going back to this fake data for a second, proportionally, new listings are being outpaced by pending. So we still have a shrinking inventory no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, it's still pretty solid, really solid. So, have you guys, I'm trying to think, what day were you guys in the studio? It wasn't last week, was it?
It was last week.
It was last week?
We had an awesome show. You can watch it and smash like and subscribe on the YouTubes. You can follow our shows on Tampa Home Talk
talked all about
or Beryl Engineering.
And insurance. It was fun.
And it will go to a podcast. So do we have guests or was it you guys?
We had a guest. We had the inspection manager of Beryl Project
Engineering.
Engineering.
Oh, you did? Nice.
Yes.
Nice. What was his take on it? Did he enjoy his time on radio?
Oh, he loved his time on radio.
Good. What do you have to say? How'd that go?
He had a lot to say. And if you want to find out more information, we insist that you tune in, you subscribe, you catch the last episode. It's the first episode of the new season here of Tampa Home Talk after a 1-month break where we were off the air.
So I believe, Pat George, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Raphael, did he air, was it, I thought it was last week, was it week before? Or
Must
did
have been
he
the
air
week
it all?
before.
Are you there or are you in another studio doing
Must
traffic?
be doing traffic. Oh,
Okay.
there we go.
No, the attorney. Did he?
The attorney, yeah, that was the week before.
So it's been about 3 weeks.
It's with the start of a new season. That's
Yeah.
the way we...
At least 3 weeks. I kind of forgot your last name.
All right. So we had Raphael Rashkin on, and he was talking about how to understand the process and how to protect yourself as a homeowner as it relates to contractors' rights and construction lien law.
What's that got to do with cooking food?
No, it was a different show. Different show. I know.
Well, that was Leo, but
You both got called out. I'm just saying.
I don't listen to the show. I watch it on the YouTubes. I smash like and subscribe. I watch it. I have friends that watch it. We do watch parties to watch the show.
YouTubes. All
watch
right.
party.
Well, so that show led to.
Hey, I need an excuse to drink.
Okay, cut it out. That show led to a conversation with Jenny, and Jenny Restrepo is back with Insured Title Agency, graduate of USF here locally, and
Go Bulls.
that's right. She's on the board of directors with Greater Tampa Realtors, and she's also on the Florida Realtors Director. Thank you for serving as a member. And she's also the marketing director here for Insured Title agency and official show partner of Tampa Home Talk. So I thought I would bring her back so we could talk about the lien line, right? A lien line is something that is in our world. A lot of people don't talk about it. Title companies know about it a lot. And
I hope so. We better know about it.
She's going to share on that more when we get back.
But
it talks about the priority and superiority of other liens versus.
Ooh, I'm excited about that. 813-377-2775. That's 813-377-2775. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome home. This is Beryl Engineering and Inspection here at Tampa Home Talk with our guest. So you said superiority of liens.
Yeah, so basically when we had Ralph on a couple weeks ago, we were talking about basically a mechanics lien. And a mechanics lien where, say, you hire a contractor, they do work on your property, and for whatever reason you haven't paid them, and now they want to file a mechanics lien on the home. When Jenny and I were talking, I was like, this is a really good topic because certain liens have more priority over others. It's based on different events, different dates, different things that happen in title. And so the one thing I wanted you guys to understand as we roll into this conversation with Jenny is Florida's a lien theory state. So what that means is here in Florida, when you buy a property, whether you pay cash or not, let's say you get a mortgage, most people do, you still get the deed on your property. You don't have to pay for it. That's an $85 or however much money they're charging for it scam.
Oh, yeah, do not do that.
You're going to get it, but you get a deed on your property, and then basically the lender puts a lien on the property in the form of a mortgage. That's how they secure the collateral to make sure you pay them back. Right?
Yes.
In a nutshell. And so I put together like a list of some of the liens that would appear, and then I'm going to let Jenny take the ball and run with it. And if I missed any, you let me know.
Okay.
But I basically, some of the ones I researched, and I wanted to make sure I didn't leave any out, but basically mortgage liens, like we just talked about, tax liens, that could be like property tax liens or like an IRS lien, HOA liens, contractor or mechanics liens, child support liens, unrecorded liens, judgment liens from clients, and then consensual liens, and then bank liens. So there's a bunch of different types of liens that can appear on a property.
Code enforcement.
Oh yeah, there you go. See, I knew she was going to give me some. I forgot.
Solar panels that you got.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah. See, I knew it.
Yes.
All right. So what type of liens are those called?
Okay, so starting off with what you are doing at the title company. So you're selling your house and you're going to convey all of your ownership rights to the buyer. And in a traditional transaction, what we're talking about is you are going to convey free and marketable title, meaning no defects on the title, meaning no issues on the title. So when you transfer all of your ownership rights to the buyer now inherits the home free and clear of any debts associated with this property. And so
I might get a new one right away with a mortgage, which is okay, but
right. And so like as Katrina is saying, when the purchase happens, if the buyer is going to have a mortgage, then what happens there is we record the change of the deed. So the seller actually signs the deed. That's their signing of the ownership rights. That's the official government document that now transfers to the buyer. And if you have obtained a mortgage, we're going to record that mortgage. So both of those get recorded in the county where the property lies. And then if the seller had a mortgage, that's your first debt that's getting paid. So the mortgage is going to be what we call satisfied. The title company will take from the proceeds for the seller. So let's just say this house is selling for $500,000. Okay, you start with your $500,000. That's your contract price. Now we start debiting what is owed against the property in order to transfer to buyer free and clear of any debts. Your mortgage is going to be whatever you owe as a payoff amount on your mortgage that's coming off the $500,000. And then from there, we're going to take away the things that the seller owes at closing so that the buyer doesn't inherit any of these debts. So of course your mortgage or any second mortgages, those are going to come off first. Then we're going to look at, and here's the ones that are dicey because sometimes sellers say, I didn't know about that.
A lot of them don't.
I mean, it could be that
sometimes they don't. It could happen.
It could be that you do not know. But if you are a person who owes child support and you are not paying your child support, if this is recorded with the court, so it has to be recorded with the state of Florida, then...
Which most of the time they are.
I mean, if you are the receiver of child support, I suggest this.
It happens. I mean, if there's open child support, it's on there.
So these are debts that are associated with the person individually, but the home is put on lien in a way that is going to try to satisfy that debt. Because the assumption is if you had the cash, you would pay it. So clearly there's a reason. So they're able to use your home. If your name is on this home, they are able to use the home as a way to secure the debt. So while you're living in the home, that number just keeps ticking. But
So
if
if I'm a deadbeat dad, then I should own the home in a trust. Does that get me out
Well,
of
so
that?
I want to dig into that for a minute since you brought it up. It's
a
a
great
good point.
question, by the
Well,
way.
look,
It is a great question.
I like it.
it's a different question because the trust owns it, not the person. So we'll talk about that in a
So
minute.
it would be
but-
immune from child support.
Well, we only have dogs, so
I
we'd
am
be
not an
deadbeat dog
attorney and I
dads.
cannot offer legal advice to deadbeat dads, but if you want to look into that more.
So
If
here-
you're a
here's-
deadbeat dad, text the word deadbeat
What a
dad
great
to
law firm name.
813
Stop it. Cut it out.
3775.
Stop it. All right, I have a question.
Yes.
So let's go back to that. And by the way, it's not all deadbeat dads. I'll have you know.
Be deadbeat moms.
No, and it's not just. Listen, okay, I'm gonna just put it out there right now and squash this little bug that you guys are doing. When my husband and I bought our first house, he couldn't buy it, and you know why? Because he had an open child support lien. Do you want to know why?
Why?
Because he had to wait for the paternity test to go through from the courts to make sure that it was his son to pay child support.
And if it turned out it was his son, what if he had paid the child support?
Yeah, he paid all the back child support
Then he
because it
would
was his son.
not a deadbeat dad. then.
But if he had paid child support right away while they were establishing paternity, then he would have to sue her to get that money back. So you have to understand the whole picture and don't think just because there's a child support lien on there, it's a deadbeat dad. That's not true. So I just want to clear that up because we're a prime example, right? Like my husband wasn't even on that house with me at that time because it was in the middle of this stuff. So it just because it's on there doesn't mean anything. If the money is owed and there's any type of lien, it's going to be on there, right? Yes. So leading to that, let's talk about that question. So let's say that child support lien is on. So let's say at the time, okay, my husband and I bought the house together. There was no child support lien, but now we're selling. We own it together. There's a child support lien, but I don't have anything to do with that.
You're married. Yes, you do.
Okay.
His debt is
So
your
what
debt.
if we're
Your
not
debt is
married?
his debt.
What if we're not married?
All these tough questions.
That's an underwriter
Yes,
question.
That is an underwriter question. Sometimes
when
we
you
have to
get
go to
these
the big dogs.
Yeah, when you get these dicey little things, sometimes titles like, "Ooh, I'm not going to answer that. We're going to
As
take
far
it
as
together."
I know, and I am certainly not the number one expert, and that's why we have underwriters and we have an attorney that we have on retainer at all times. So if we need to defer to a higher authority, we absolutely do. But if this is your... So Katrina has in her notes judgments. Judgments is a thing where it may not be you. If you have a common name, say your name is John Smith, and there's a bunch of other John Smiths out there doing dirty, and they have judgments against them. This is why the title company is asking for your social security number, because they're going to cross-reference any of these judgments and exclude anything that's not you, John Smith. It's the other guys. So that does come up sometimes, and it's not correct, and it is not that person, and it does not attach to them. But IRS liens, so I have a story for that. I had an agent contact us and say, "Oh, I'm writing up this contract. It was like $1 million property. The buyer was paying cash, but the listing agent, not in the Tampa Bay area, this was in Boca, the listing agent was asking the buyer's agent to write 2 contracts." So Katrina's going to tell us why this is not a thing. The listing agent was telling this buyer's agent to write 2 contracts, one for the purchase of the home and one for the purchase of the contents. And
that makes sense.
I said to this agent, I said, "Explain more. Give the address." Okay. So I looked it up, and sure enough, those sellers had an IRS tax lien against the house, so they were trying to do a slick one and get cash because all of the money from the sale of the house was going to go to satisfy their IRS debt, and they knew that. And so any listing agents out there that are doing that, do not do that.
Well,
because Do you want to have the IRS
Well, so
contacting you?
let's talk about that, because that is not considered real property.
Correct.
If you're selling contents in the home, that's not even in our scope of expertise or licensing. If you're selling property, that has to be handled from the seller on their own without the agent involved. So you can write a contract, but there can't be two contracts from the agent.
But what if,
Yes.
well, here's a scenario for you. What if you're buying a business and the business comes with property and you buy the property and then you buy the business separately? Because the contents of the business, of the building would be the business.
Well, now you're talking commercial versus residential, and that's chattel, and it's all these other things. So, a commercial contract is much more in depth than a residential contract. But as Katrina mentioned, in a residential contract, you cannot include personal effects. So it's only things
But
that
you can
are
include them if
affixed.
they don't have any value.
Well, it's like anything that's affixed to the property. So obviously when you sell the house, the in-ground pool goes, the ceiling fans.
I tell people, if you take the house and you turn it upside down, anything that's permanently attached is real property. Anything that falls to the floor is personal. Did I say that wrong? Anything
you had
that's
it right.
attached
No,
is
you had it
real
right.
property.
Yeah,
Anything
yeah.
that falls to
You
the
said it
floor
right.
is personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you took your house and turned it upside down, you'd probably lose some value there.
You know what I'm saying, though,
Yes,
right?
You don't
Like,
have to be a giant.
to help people understand, right?
But-
Because I sold this property in South Tampa before, and I had attorneys on both sides. So the seller and the buyer were both attorneys, and neither one of them were real estate attorneys. So they're both trying to bring in real estate attorneys. That was fun.
Yes.
So the seller had these gates that were like from another country that were bolted on the side of the windows, and so that's why we had to get really in depth on that. So we didn't have litigation later. But anyway, Jenny, you get to
Yes.
finish your conversation uninterrupted when we come back after the break.
Okay, sounds
This
good.
is Tampa Home Talk. 813-377-2775. We'll be right back.
And welcome home. This is Tampa Home Talk. I'm Adam Talley with Talley Insurance for your insurance tip of the week. And this week I want to talk about commercial insurance, specifically commercial property insurance, because we are about to get into hurricane season here in a couple months. And something that I've been seeing a lot of people do lately, and it's not something I necessarily recommend, but I've been seeing a lot of people exclude business income and extra expense, right? And what that is that's money that comes to you to replace any lost income from not being able to use that particular property, right? It's essentially like loss of use on your homeowner's policy, but it's not always included. And so we're seeing a lot of people take that off. And especially on some lessor's risks, which would be like you own the building, but you lease it out to other commercial tenants. I think it's pretty risky, right? And we have people doing that, and they're also increasing their hurricane deductibles. So I had one this week where, they didn't want that. They have a 10% hurricane deductible on a $1.3 million building. So you're sitting there with, essentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in exposure if a storm comes. So if you're a commercial building owner, I recommend you look at your policy, make sure that it's on there. Even if you're a tenant, I recommend you look at the policy, make sure that it's on there. It's usually not that expensive to add, right? I mean, in this case, it was, maybe 10% of the overall premium, maybe less. But when you're dealing in those large numbers, if you have $300,000-$400,000 worth of income coming in, you want to at least be able to replace 6 months of that, which is the general rule we go by. So check your policy. It's worth it. Now, a lot of these if you're a smaller business and you have a BOP, right, which is a business owner's policy, which kind of like I always equate it to a homeowner's policy, right, because it just comes with all these built-in coverages. You're probably fine, but it is worth checking. On these bigger buildings, everything's going more to the excess and surplus lines markets, which are going to be your Lloyd's markets, and those are essentially a la carte. If you don't put it on the app that you want it, they're not going to send it on the quote to you. So you might not even know that you don't have it unless you've checked your policy recently. So I recommend doing an audit before we get to hurricane season and making sure that you have all your ducks in a row.
There's so many things with insurance. Like, nobody really reads it until something's wrong, and then you need to
Yes.
read it. It's just one of those things.
Well, and on our end, we have to document everything. So, like, I try to quote it with all the bells and whistles, and then
Let 'em
if
take it
you-
out.
If you want to if you want it removed, I'm going to save that email. I'm going to save everything to make sure, like, hey, I gave you the option. That would be
We said
normal.
take it out, yeah.
We'll
You know,
take it
Adam's
out.
story about removing things from insurance reminds me of that final building of the final unit in that apartment building. It might have been last, but it was not least.
And with that, I leave you to Title Talk. It's a pleasure as always. Katrina, welcome back from
Thank
Europe. You look great.
Thank you.
Look well rested. So
I'm rested, but we were go. So
I hope
yeah.
everybody has a happy Easter as
Thank
well.
you.
So thank you guys.
All right. Well, so yeah, let's chat about this because we were. Where do we leave off? Like you were in the middle of saying something that we were talking on the break about the different deed types and liens and
Yes.
auctions and all that stuff.
So the question was, in what order do these liens have to be satisfied? And so I said, in order for a seller to transfer free and clear marketable title, they all have to be satisfied. So essentially, yes, the mortgage, and then if you owe money to your HOA, they're all kind of going in line. But this is where it's
Who
really
takes priority? Like other than normally it goes based on the date that it was recorded, but who takes priority? Because I know if you're short the amount of money you need to pay all these off, then you effectively become a short sale.
Yes.
But who takes priority? Some of these jump, right, based on when they're recorded. Like HOA is one that jumps, doesn't it?
Well, it doesn't, as far as I know, the order that they're getting paid in is if you don't have enough to pay them all, then you're not conveying this property with clear title.
True.
So now you can either sell it cash and see if a buyer will take on some of the debt. But the ones that attach to the person, the IRS, the child support, any judgments like unpaid credit cards or any other type of financial based lawsuit, that's a judgment in court. That attaches to the person. Code enforcement violation liens, once the violations turn into a lien that's been leveraged either by your city or your county, those attach to the property. And then say you got those solar panels put on the roof and you agreed to take out a loan and it's paid off in a certain amount of time, but now you're selling the property before that is paid off. That is one example of what you are able to do depending on the kind of agreement that you entered into, is if that debt is
There's
assumable.
no good one. Have you seen any good one on solar?
Oh.
No. Keep going.
So with that one, now you as seller can either pay it off at closing, or if the debt is assumable, meaning if the buyer is, number one, willing to take on the
We're
balance.
seeing a lot of them not willing. Are you
not
seeing that?
willing. Yes. I mean, as far as title goes, that's between the agent,
Right.
buyer, and seller. So
It was just
we do whatever you guys say.
It was a curious question. Like,
But not all. So if you're considering solar, not all of those agreements are assumable. And then let's say that the buyer is willing to assume the remaining balance. They have to get approved by whatever company is holding that balance that they are able to assume. And then now that goes against your buyer's debt to income ratio, because that adds into now what an additional monthly payment or however that works. But solar panels are one of the ones that can transfer to a buyer, but everyone has to agree. Now, I have a good story about code enforcement violations. So the violation, that first letter is your heads up to fix it, and they give you what they call a curative period. But if you ignore this, or if the home has been left in a derelict condition, let's say, so this was City of Palm Harbor. They don't like messy houses in Palm Harbor. So if you let your house go, most of the time this is the exterior. So you're not cutting the grass, you're not fixing broken shutters, your pool cage is in disrepair. The city may leverage against you code enforcement violations. And they're saying you need to fix this. Ultimately, what they want is for you to fix it. But let's say no one's fixing it. This house has been abandoned, whatever's going on with it.
or they ignore it.
Or they ignore it. Now it starts to pile up. Now the city can actually place a lien against your property for the balance of these code enforcement debts. And sometimes they will keep going every single day that you ignore it. So there was a house in Palm Harbor that had accrued over $100,000 in code enforcement violation lien debt, meaning this that attaches to the property. However, there was a buyer that was very interested in the property, and she was willing to purchase the home with the code enforcement lien and take a chance on it as long as the sales price reflected the risk of the balance. And then her intention was to fix it up, and since she was paying cash, she could do. So, she worked with code enforcement directly, met with the code enforcement officer, toured the property, got the punch list. Ultimately, it worked out in her favor, where she was able to get that debt from $110,000 down to $10,000. So she did basically pay the administrative cost of it, but she got the home for a great value and then fixed it for her daughter and her husband.
A lot of times they will negotiate, especially with another party.
Yes.
I found as a realtor, when I'll call these people directly and just say, hey, look, I know there's been some neglect on the property. I know you guys want it fixed. We see the lien. We're working on it. We're going to either get this repaired or deal with it with a buyer. And a lot of times we'll start negotiating that to see if they'll reduce it. Many of them will if they know it's going away.
Ultimately, the fine is just the motivating factor to get you to fix it. Because ultimately, what they want is for the house to be filled with an owner-occupant who takes care of the property, has pride of ownership. Nobody wants that ghost house on the corner in their neighborhood. So the city or the county is not designed to just go after homeowners and leverage monies against them. In fact, the city of St. Petersburg has a buyer program where if the buyer wants to purchase a home, and you could purchase that home with, let's say, a renovation loan. Katrina can tell you about all that if you're thinking about that as a buyer. But let's say
they do them too. They do the
203Ks.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Fannie Mae home style.
Exactly. So, all these ugly houses don't have to be left in the wind. Could be a great option for you if that's what you're thinking. But now let's say this ugly house that I want to do a renovation loan on has $75,000 worth of code enforcement violations. Well, I'm not trying to do all of that. The city of St. Petersburg actually does have a buyer program where they will basically put the lien on pause. You can purchase the home free and clear of that lien, and then you're given a curative period. So
that's nice.
From closing, let's say it's 6 months. It all depends, so you have to be specific in every case. But let's say they give you 6 months to fix all of the things, and they'll give you the full punch list. Here's everything that was a violation. And in that 6 months, you fix everything, then that lien is forgiven.
That's pretty nice. That's a good idea.
It's the decision of the lien placer, essentially. So City of St. Petersburg is willing to put that lien on pause because clearly they would rather have a house that's fixed up than just let it sit there and continue to accrue debt that no one wants to touch because no one wants to take on a debt that they didn't earn.
And you can get your commissioners involved too. They can help with this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so.
I know it may not be just limited to City of St. Petersburg. So, if this is something that you want to research more, call the show. Katrina can certainly help you with that. But most of the time, you've got these liens, and the liens need to be satisfied in order to sell the property. And so that's why at Insured Title, we work with our listing agent partners. We want you to send us your listing agreement. Don't wait till you go under contract with the buyer, because this is all stuff that we can find out up front. Start looking at the names and make sure that the client is aware. Because now you're looking at your seller net sheet, and if you're like, well, we can't list it for $700,000 if it's only worth $500,000 just to clear your debts. Mm-hmm. You can, but it's probably not going to sell.
But we're not going to do it.
No, exactly. So, these are the situations where if someone doesn't, let's say they don't know, they didn't know that this was going on, or they didn't realize that this attaches to this. Now, they thought they were going to be making X amount of dollars at closing, and that number just starts going down, 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 down. And then... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I wanted to talk a little bit about the some of the liens that they sort of leapfrog, right? Or they can take some priority and essentially, because not all of these have foreclosure rights. A lot of them just sit there, and some of them accrue interest or penalties. For example, the code enforcement lien.
Yes.
They're not going to foreclose on your home for code enforcement. I haven't seen that. But
I have not seen that.
Usually it's HOA, mortgage, sometimes IRS, although it's rare.
So the HOA can foreclose on your property for non-payment of HOA dues. And if you think about the order, usually your mortgage comes first and then your HOA. But in Florida, the HOA can foreclose on you for lack of payment because
they can actually foreclose for more than just lack of payment. But
essentially, because when you belong to an HOA, your ownership affects everyone else's ownership. So you not paying your HOA dues affects the reserves, it affects the maintenance of the property and the maintenance of the common areas, especially in condos. So they can't just let that go on forever and ever and ever. It impacts every other person, every other homeowner in that HOA. So in that situation, don't not pay your HOA dues because they can foreclose on you actually faster than your lender. Yeah. And then obviously when we had the big market crash in the early 2000s, Florida put laws in place that allows that foreclosure situation to go faster.
A lot of stuff has changed since that time, for sure. If you have more questions related to title, how some of these liens affect you, or if they're on your property, we can definitely have Insured Title Agency check it out. Call or text 813-377-2775.
Welcome home. This is Leo Kane with Beryl Engineering and Inspection, bringing you the final segment of the return of a season of Tampa Home Talk here in Land O'Lakes, Florida.
Oh, I've lost count of the seasons and the years and the numbers.
Well, last year we celebrated your 10-year anniversary.
We did, 10 years.
So this would technically be season 11.
We're rolling into 11, yeah, for sure, yeah. Mm-hmm. My first year of radio got wiped away. There's no podcast out there anymore. But
my first year of radio, which is back in the late 90s, is still around.
Where? On a podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Good.
Because I'm really big on the smash, like, and subscribe. You can go back. You can see how my daunting humor has changed from non-dad joke to dad joke.
I'm going to
actually find the transition of when it occurred. When it occurred that people like the raunchy humor, but people really like the cringy humor.
What was the name of that show? Was that your pirate radio show?
I had the TLP. I also had a hardcore and metal show. We called it The Brutal Backhand.
Okay.
It was a tennis reference. And then I also had a death metal and grindcore show, and it was called Exsanguination.
You go, Leo. Go.
I'm very proud of my hardcore metal show and my death metal grindcore shows.
What about the other one? What was the other one about?
Oh, it was just it was talk about like the music industry in general or the entertainment industry and video games, and it was just a casual conversational talk show.
All right.
Did you watch Headbangers Ball back in the day?
Oh, back in the day, yes. Back when MTV actually had music.
Music.
And music videos were more than just a band in a garage playing.
Yes.
Yeah, that was interesting times. They did an 80s trivia on the cruise that I was on. They were talking. MTV was one of the trivia answers.
Oh, I would have nailed that trivia.
Yeah,
we still have to do trivia as a group.
I know, that'll be fun.
Yeah, because I have like no knowledge in certain arenas like sports or modern pop. But once you go back in time, I've got like so much useless information.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why you get a good trivia group together where everybody brings a little bit. Like I used to have my sports person for trivia. And I was like, sports question, you.
All right. So let's talk about these liens. Some of them can actually force a sale.
Yes.
So it's rare that it happens on an IRS lien, although it could. HOA liens can foreclose and force that sale to get their money. Property taxes they can force and get their money after 3 years?
Yes, and your bank, obviously.
And then
your
mortgages.
Bank. Yes.
Yep.
But with property taxes, more or less, the reason that they can foreclose on you for undue property taxes is because oftentimes I think those homes have been abandoned. So let's say someone passes away, that person doesn't have heirs. This is now the ghost house. Like it's becoming in derelict condition. And the ability for the government to come in and foreclose because of undue property taxes allows for this home to now transfer ownership. Because if a person is deceased and we don't have heirs and there's no one to put it through probate, then it becomes this sort of logistical nightmare of, well, who actually owns it that can transfer these ownership rights?
How does that work on title? Like if someone picks it up at a tax deed auction.
Yes.
And there was no probate. Like, how does that work? How does that continue on to title?
Right. So you've heard about the selling on the courthouse steps. Mm-hmm. That's how it actually was in the past, is they would auction things off on the courthouse steps. Well, not in 2024.
Right.
Now there's actually websites for it, but it is essentially still an auction process. So you go to the real foreclose for whatever the county is, and let's say it's Hillsborough County. You go go to the website, you can see what properties are available for auction. But what you don't get to see is, like, it's not like if you call Katrina, you ask to see a home, you get an appointment, you tour the property. It's not that. You're basically offering cash on this property, in many ways sight unseen. You can maybe drive by it. But purchasing at an auction does not give you free and clear title necessarily. And you don't know about the condition. So you would get what we call a certificate of title. So you become the proud owner of what could be an amazing opportunity, or it could be a big old headache. You're taking a risk. You're getting it for a lot less than fair market value, and so then this is the risk that you take. And so that's what some investors have built their whole business model on. But you have to be able to pad that investment with a couple of duds, because what if it's completely infested with termites? What if you haven't knocked out the mortgage debt or other code enforcement liens? Those are not cleared when you purchase at auction.
But just to warn everyone about, because I purchased at auction, there are groups out there that will get the auction list and do research for you, and these investors get packets, and now they're droning the properties, they're thermaling the properties, they're contacting HOAs to find out all these dues. So these investors actually have the information on hand about all of the properties in an auction. When I find neat, when I was doing auctions to buy condos in a certain building, and I was waiting for those units to come up, and I was actually attending those auctions, is when the properties are duds, none of the investors are voting on these things or bidding on them, and they all go for like the $100 back to the bank. But when a property was actually viable, the whole room of investors would explode in the bidding. And what ends up happening is, if it's a good property, it goes for on or about what the property appraiser value said it was. And that's when it was in person. By opening it up to more people, the public, these online versions, you've just increased the competition, so you're getting more of the money for these properties. So if you are a novice at auction, I highly don't recommend it, because these investors who have these packets know what they're buying for who they're buying. And it's kind of neat. Like when it was in person, you would do certain things, like your next bid had to be $100 higher than the one before it. So the savvy bidders are never bidding on round numbers. They're trying to trip you up, because if you say the wrong number when they're going once, going twice, sold, and I say like $704 and then you say $800, that's not going to count, and the property will be sold and you won't get your bid in.
So my friend actually bought her condo through the Pinellas County auction system. She was the tenant that was renting it, but the owner had let it go into foreclosure for undue HOA dues. When she bought it, so she had ITA do the whole, like, look and see what's attached to it, what's not. Everything looked good. She got it for a great price. And in the electronic environment, so she said, I'm willing to pay up to $45,000. And then they still do it like what you see in a live auction, where they'll only upbid it by a certain amount. So you put your top amount, but the other bidders don't see what your top amount is. And so then it goes up by those increments. And then if you ultimately end up being the winner, you don't necessarily pay the full 45. You pay whatever was the highest in that incremental bidding back and forth. So that's kind of cool. But once she assumed the ownership, then the HOA had foreclosed. The HOA lien came back.
Right. Some of those wipe away, though, right? There's some that wipe away. Don't mechanics liens wipe off? I think some of those wipe off.
It depends.
Yeah, that's probably another whole show, right?
Maybe. But if you're worried about anything getting recorded against your property, I know I've talked about it on the show before. Property Fraud Alert is a free service. It's offered by your county. So whatever county you're in the greater Tampa Bay area, just Google Property Fraud Alert that county and get signed up. You put your name in, you sign up for text alerts, and if anything is recorded, you'll get a text right away.
And that's a wrap. This is Tampa Home Talk. I'm your host, 813-377-2775. Love where you live, or we're going to fix it. Welcome home.